HW here. I was going to say it's a beautiful morning in Nashville, but it's like 1 o'clock, man. It's like 1 o'clock. I was distracted this morning with the happenings of the world, and then I said, put that away, HW. Put that, my mind said to me, put that away, HW. You don't have nothing to do with that. You, in all your effort today, cannot change those things you're focused on. So get away from that and put your effort and your mind towards the things you can change. Because that is where your talents, your effort, and your mind and your heart belong. Because that is what is given to you to influence, to control, to captivate, to persuade. As Jordan Peterson says, clean your room. Not other people's room. You can't clean their room. You could if they invited you over, I suppose, but you know what I'm saying. So I said, be gone with you, social media feed. Be gone with you, X feed, political discourse. Be gone with you, headlines of the day. And instead, tone. Here we go. Do you guys ever wonder... Do you ever wonder what a real PAF sounds like? Or rather, what it sounded like back then? You know what I'm saying? Do you ever wonder what it sounded like back then? So I remember there was this pickup brand called Kidman for a while. And Kidman was like, I think they degaussed magnets. And so they were like, this is, their whole thing, if I'm getting this right, I can't remember. Kidman had silent pickups, but they also had they degaussed the magnets. And their thing was like, these sound like, I guess... I can't remember if Kidman was like, these sound like pickups did back then, new, or these sound like them today, because we degaussed the magnets a bit. I think it was the second. But anyway, here's this thing that happens over time. He got these old guitars, right? And they were made in the 50s. It's called like a burst guitar or like a 57 or a 59 Strat, you know? You got these old guitars and everyone's like, that's the standard. That's what it's got to be. That's what the best tone ever was, right? Why? Because all the heroes used it. They did it. They were great. They were this. They were that. And it's funny. You go back and you talk to those guys and they're like, you know, it's like, Stevie, why did you play a tube screamer? And all the interviews where they ask him that, he's like, well, we didn't have anything else, you know? And whenever they ask, like I remember people are like, I wonder why Hendrix used a fuzz face. And it's like, well, Hendrix used a Vox Clyde McCoy, a fuzz face, and like a Marshall. I mean, he literally used the stuff that was like the easiest to find at the time. Now, a Marshall, obviously, what maybe wasn't the easiest to find in the States. But surely, guys like Clapton, you can go back and watch the old Cream interview where he's sitting there in front of his big full stack. He's sitting down, leaning on it. And dude, he's just talking about like, you know, well, I want to try this pedal out, and, you know, these amps are really great and all this stuff. And it's funny because it's like, these guys there wasn't like a whole boutique pedal world at their fingertips, you know? So they just kind of used what they had, and they used it to great effect because, you know, great art comes from, you know, restraint, you know? Restraint gives way to great art, you know? How you use something is often much more important than what you use, you know? And you see that, right? You see that all over the place. You see that with Dumble, certainly. The guy made these amps, and they're legendary, and they're famous. You look inside, there's some PV components. But he wasn't a guy on the internet. You know what I mean? He wasn't a guy on the internet who was like, no, this Mercury Magnets is the only transformer you're allowed to have. No, he was like, you know, the Bassman transformers are the ones I want. The blackface Bassman transformers are the ones I want. And then what are you going to do with it? Well, pretty much everything. Like before the phase inverter, I'm going to completely build a different amp. But he was like, yeah, this power section's good. I like this. This is right. And then, so it's like he didn't like come up with some, he didn't wind his own transformer, right? It's like the Trainwreck guy, Ken. He didn't wind his own transformer. He just had someone make it to the spec. He was like, I want it kind of like this, you know? And isn't that transformer very similar to something in like an old Ampeg bass amp? Anyway, I could be wrong. Anyway, the point is, you know, the Bassman transformers are the ones I want. The blackface Bassman transformers are the ones I want. And then what are you going to do with it? Well, pretty much everything. Like before the phase inverter, I'm going to completely build a different amp. But he was like, yeah, this power section's good. I like this. This is right. And then, so it's like he didn't We really don't know when we go back and we think like what did these things sound like? What did a PAF sound like new versus what does it sound like now, right? Because these guys like they discovered PAFs like a couple years later. Like it was the next decade, really. That in the mid to late 60s they were like, "Hey, these older pickups are great." And they were kind of affordable. That's another thing, by the way. The affordability of the stuff plays into it. And so they were kind of affordable, and so they started using them. And, obviously the values go through the roof because they didn't make that many, because commercially bursts weren't successful. Strats were successful, but they were all handmade, And these were like high quality instruments made for professional musicians. It wasn't mass market until later when rock and roll blew up, that bigger people started buying it. CBS, why did they buy Fender musical instruments? Well, because they were playing records. CBS owned radio stations, and they were getting into television, and they saw these as the things that were on TV, and they thought, well, we play music, maybe we should be involved in making music because this is getting popular with kids over our airwaves, right? Somebody at CBS probably like walked into a boardroom and said, I got this thing. It's like a vertical integration. But a little different, We put out guitar sounds over the airwaves. Let's put out guitar sounds over the wood and over the thing, right? It's kind of an interesting thought. It's a really good idea. And they thought, we make radios, right? Maybe that was RCA. I don't know. Did CBS make radios? Maybe. But you know what I'm saying? It's kind of a like business. It's obvious how their attention got to it. But we have all this fabled old stuff, and if I'm being really honest, I kind of sometimes think, how does anyone know what anything sounded like? Especially when you think of like all the old records were through old microphones, old recording equipment. And even though we still use a lot of that stuff today, we use it because it's so full of color. And now we have stuff that's a lot more transparent, a lot more true, and we don't always choose that stuff because we like some of the color of the old stuff. So this old stuff has all this color on it, and we use that old stuff that has all the color on it, all the signature frequency, changes from microphones, preamps, this, that, tape machines, all this stuff, and we go, see, here's what the old pickup sounded like. But it's like, nobody right now knows what a PAF sounded like back then, because you literally can't recall a sound of just a PAF through an amp. It's all got to be through going through a microphone, going through this, going through that. You know what I mean? And so then what we have is these existing guitars that are, this is made to the spec of an old PAF with the same wire as an old PAF. And then we actually do have old PAFs, but the magnets have degaussed over time. And I'll tell you from personal experience, when you have an older amp and all the caps start puttering out and stuff, and you measure them and you're like, okay, it's 80% of its life left. Like what that means is like, or it's like it's 80% where it's supposed to be. It's like, hey, I measured it. It's not up to where it's supposed to be, but I can leave the amp alone for a while. Or we can replace it, but that's an original part coming out, right? And so you kind of do this balance where you're like, this cap is literally in the middle, is in the middle of destroying itself. But I'm going to wait a little while until it destroys itself more, right? And then at some point you're like, it destroyed itself too much. I'm going to put in a new one. And then you go, but this is to the spec of that one. So this is probably how it sounded back then. And I'll tell you from firsthand experience, you get an old amp and it has a lot of original components, and you let it, the sound starts to change, it changes, and then you go get some stuff replaced. Your amp always comes out brighter and cleaner than it was before. And that's always a funny thing to me. It's always brighter and cleaner than it was before. It's got more headroom, and it might even have less compression. There seems to be a bit more just response. Maybe that's a tube thing, or maybe that's a bias thing. Who knows, right? The other thing is you got these amps that, there's the proper tubes don't exist anymore unless you buy new old stock. And so that's a whole thing too, by the way. You get some of these companies, they even made stuff in the 90s, and they're using circuits from the 90s. People go, those ones in the 90s sound different. And you got the poor tube guy today who is building the amps today. Maybe he designed them, maybe he didn't. And he's going, well, actually, like we used to want this out of it, and now because tubes are different, the plate voltage and all that stuff, it's all different. I actually should change the circuit a little bit to compensate to get the same thing out of this new tube as I used to get out of the old tube. That would make it sound like, and then people are like, no, you can't do that. You're messing up the old thing. And they're sitting there like, no, but it's not the old thing. Don't you get it? Don't you get it's not the old thing? And so that's a whole crazy rant I just gave you to just say, how does anyone know what a PAF sounds like? Because I got two guitars right here, and I run into this as a pickup maker. Or, I'm sorry, as a profile maker, capture, profile, this stuff. People go, I have a Les Paul, and it doesn't sound like what's in your video. And I just go, yeah, man, well, you don't have my Les Paul. You don't have, these pickups or that, and I don't have yours. And it's like a whole thing. I don't mean like I got something better than you. I mean like we got different stuff, and we might be listening to different stuff and hearing different stuff, and your phone's going to be different than this and that. So I thought it would be fun. Here's two guitars that both claim to be like kind of authentic, because that's like the Japanese highest version of a Les Paul that they were making at Tokai. And then they put DiMarzio's in it. And DiMarzio says those pickups are like a PAF. And then you got old Paul over here going, this ain't really like a Les Paul, but it's really awesome single cut, and it has the tone of the old ones because it's like a 5708 pickup, right? So I'm just going to play you a couple things. You tell me if they sound different. Okay, now I'm going to jump to the middle right on this one, and it's going to sound like this. Okay, now on the bridge. Significantly different to me. This guitar is more open and bright. This one is so much more compressed, and that compression results in a real warmth, because that extra compression means that when you hit a chord, you don't get as much bright high end coming through before you get the lower mids. It's like if I just play higher stuff, I don't think this guitar is actually darker in a way that you would translate it as darker. I feel like it has more mid-range. The high end to me seems like that's pretty bright. But it's just got this mid-range. They're actually really great PAFs, you guys. In my opinion, the PRS 5708s are, no joke, some of the best pickups out there. I think there's a lot of takes on the PAF sound, but to me, these pickups, these 5708s, are just super special. They're not that cheap, but they come in some of the PRS guitars like the CEs that are pretty affordable as far as PRSs go. So we're not talking about import pricing. I'm not talking about the SEs. I'm just mean like for a core model, the CE is the lowest you can get. I think the S2 might actually be a little cheaper. I'm not sure, but the CE models used are, for an American-made guitar, and especially an American-made PRS, the CEs are, a good deal, I think. I'm looking for a CE right now. And I notice a lot of them have 5708 pickups. And when I'm looking online, I'm going, dang, I know that's a deal because I know how this thing sounds. Now, guitars do make a difference. I know there's a Jim Lill video that might have you think guitars don't make a difference at all. And I could talk about in a future video what I think that video proves and what it doesn't prove, and kind of how a lot of people, I think, mistake what Jim is showing you for it to mean something slightly different. Guitars obviously make a difference, and I know that because, you can buy two just standard production pickups that are made on automated winders to the exact same spec. You can put them in two different guitars, and they will sound different. You can hear some differences in guitars. I told you in a past video that I actually had two of these. This one was lower in the bass and had a really great mid-range. Today I'm describing it as having a really great mid-range compared to other guitars that look a little bit like it. There was another model. The finish was a little different. It was a darker tobacco burst, but it was the same model, very similar tiger striping. It was the same model, same year. It wasn't a 10 top, but and it had appreciably more bass and it was heavier. So and me and my buddy Matt Revere, who plays for Carrie Underwood, you guys have seen him on the channel. He is like a Sir artist, they give him stuff. And he had a Strat. I'll just tell you, he had his main Strat that he plays all the time. And it came with, I can't remember the single coils he had, but he had a Thornbucker in that guitar. Now, I had a Sir with Thornbuckers, two of them actually. And I sold one because I stopped liking the Thornbucker after a while. To me, it was too much high-end presence. It was like, it sounded almost like there was a clean high-end on top of my normal PAF pickup. And at first it was kind of cool, but then I really stopped liking it. And I started favoring the SSVs more from Sir, the sort of just go-to PAF type tone. And I thought for a long time I didn't like those Thornbuckers. Well, I took them out of one guitar, put in some other stuff. I liked the guitar a lot better once I got rid of the Thornbuckers. And then I sold one of them. Well, Matt had a guitar, and he told me, I don't like this pickup very much. I said, what is it? He said, it's a Thornbucker. I said, dude, I don't like those pickups very much. I don't know what I'm missing, but I don't like them very much. So he put an SSV in his Strat, right, on a pick guard on the Strat. And we both agreed it sounded way better. He took it on the road. Everybody was happy. Tour guy was happy with the sound. Sound guy's happy with the sound. He's happy with the sound, you know what I mean? They called him back for the gig the next week, right? So, they didn't fire him over a pickup, right? So it must have worked. So the SSV passed the test. But you know what? Later, they sent him a Pete Thorn model. That was slightly different. It had one little tweak that he had requested, but it was a Pete Thorn model. It had the Thornbuckers in there, but this time they're mounted directly to mahogany with no top, no pick guard, anything. That pickup sounded incredible. And when we then put it next to the SSV in his Strat, I said, man, that sounds a little bit different, but that doesn't sound anything like it did in this other guitar. That's not overly bright. That doesn't have that present thing. And I knew exactly what it sounded like because I owned a guitar with those. A JM, they were on it was on a pick guard, and then he had it on a pick guard, and so I walked away from that going, man, that pickup screwed into the wood. I've never had that experience other than this time. Now a lot of people may be going, HW, come on, you can hear what the pickup screwed into, whether it's connected to the guitar by plastic or by screwed into the mahogany. I don't know. I'm just telling you, both Matt and I, independently of each other, had that pickup on a Suhr guitar with a 510 at the same scale length, right? His Strat is not my Strat, but they look very similar, right? They're made very similar. I believe they're the same wood, maple neck, everything. It's a Strat. We both set, mine was a JM, but similar wood, maple neck, same scale length, go to a 510. Should be pretty similar, right? Putting in a JM body or a Strat body and some other pickup, right? Should be pretty similar. But man, we both had independent of each other. We thought that pickup was too bright. And then he gets that same pickup they send him in a different guitar, in the guitar that it was designed for. And we both said it sounded more close to the SSV in another guitar. Does that make sense? We both said, now it's right. That's correct. That's the right amount of high end I would expect to hear. Man, that pickup sounds great. And that's what we didn't experience in the other guitars. Our complaints were gone. I at least know that. Both he and I both agreed. Our complaint about that pickup was not present in the guitar when it was mounted directly to wood. So take that for whatever it means. I mean, I just try to figure this stuff out like anybody else. I don't have a real dog in the fight of whether you can hear a pickup different screwed into the wood or not. I don't have a dog in the fight of whether, Jim Lil's video that you don't need a guitar body at all, proves that you don't need a guitar body at all. I don't sell guitar bodies. So I'm just trying to figure it out like anybody else. How do you affect your tone? And how do you, how does it play into it? Because I'll tell you another story. My buddy Desi had a 594 and he had this guitar and he said, man, my 594 is just not cutting through. I should be careful saying this because PRS gave him the guitar. PRS had these great pickups in it, these 594 pickups, and then he borrowed this and he said, Johnny, he said, HW, that is a great sounding guitar, dude. That one is special. And I said, I know, man. It's light. It's wonderful. It's resonant. It's thick. It's just beautiful and bright and everything. It's great. And then he bought these same 5708s for his 594, and he said they sounded different. And he goes, I adjusted the height and everything. I couldn't quite get them right. He ended up buying Seymour Duncan 59s. And boom, he was like, that is the sound. So he went with a cheaper pickup than these or that came in the 594. And for his guitar, he said, that's exactly what I wanted. So all that to say, we don't really know what stuff sounded like way back when. And we don't really know what stuff is going to sound like when we just build it brand new. I mean, it's a lot of unknown. I know that Seymour Duncan is building the pickups, exactly with this tight tolerance. I know that DiMarzio is doing that. I know that PRS is doing that. But sometimes you get a pickup, you put in a guitar, and you just go, that's not it, man. That's not it. You know what I mean? I don't know why. Screwed directly into the wood, put on this, put on that. So we're all just guessing. And it kind of leads me to believe at the end of the day, these people, especially at these companies who are very authoritative, like this has to be this way or this way, and the people on the boards, I think they're just lying to us, man. I don't think they're that sure. I really don't. I don't think they're that sure because I feel like I've tried a lot of stuff, but I've tried way less than a lot of the quote unquote experts. And I feel like I have enough evidence to debunk a lot of commonly held theories around pickups, around wood, around what did this used to sound like? What is it supposed to sound like? These two are supposed to sound the same, right? It's two people going after the same thing. But yeah, and then when you learn a little about bursts and stuff, you realize, well, actually there's some duds out there. There's some dogs and different bursts sound different. So maybe they were going after something different than these guys were going after, or maybe they're just both going after an amalgamation of the same thing, It reminds me of that John Mayer pickup, right? There's 63.5s, JM 635. That's the number on his pickup. Why is it 63.5? Well, they looked at a 63 Strat John had and a 64 Strat he had, and they put the pickup somewhere in the middle of those two pickups. So it's like the 63.5 year. That's why they're the JM 635s. So are they going for anything? Well, yeah. They're going for this range right here, right? So It's like we're within the margin of error. And I think that's the best you can do, man. But I think when people go, these pickups sound just like an old Les Paul. These pickups sound just like this, or this is going to make your guitar sound like XYZ. I think that's kind of lies. Maybe not nefarious lies, but I don't think it's a totally truthful statement. Maybe I'll say it that way.